So I've made no secret of the fact that I like 7 by 13 inch snare drums. Of all the snare drums that I've built, I've at least got 2 7 by 13s in that lineup. And of course I've got my favorite DW 7 by 13. So I've added a new 7 by 13 to the family in the form of a brass over black over brass. Now the idea behind this drum, this thing echoes. So the idea behind this drum was to make sort of my own Ersatz Black Beauty snare drum. Now, Ludwig does not make the Black Beauty in a 7 by 13 size. They tend to go with more traditional 14-inch sizes and depths. However, they do make something similar to this in, I think, their Universal Metal series. They make a black over brass 7 by 13 with their usual Ludwig chrome hardware on there. I wanted to dress this up just a little bit more, and so everything that would ordinarily be chrome, I went with brass. And got all of this hardware from Drum Factory Direct. The shell, I think, is a World Max black over brass shell, 7 by 13 brass beaded. And then I used 4.5 inch tube lugs. This sort of a Ludwig, it's not a Ludwig strainer, but it's a P85 style. And just a standard butt plate. And it's just got one air vent in it. I got a second one. I thought about maybe sticking another vent on this side, but I figure it's easier to not drill a hole than to try and undrill a hole. It seems to be fine with just the one air vent. Pretty straightforward construction. I got all of the parts cobbled together. I drilled out the shell using a unibit. And the advantage that this has over a standard drill bit is that there's only one cutting surface and you can gradually open up the hole as you're going. And I used a drill press on this. So I could take my time, be very careful, and the idea is that you don't want your drill to grab the metal and start tearing it, because brass is relatively soft, and so you have to be careful when you're drilling it out. Fortunately, this went fine on all of the holes of every size. Once that was done, I could pull the marking tape off that I used and polish everything up and then assemble the drum. One other thing about the construction of this thing, the snare drum shell does have snare beds in it, but they're very subtle, and it took me staring at it a little bit to recognize that they were there. I think also the manufacturer puts a couple of little tick marks on the inside of the brass so that you can kind of locate where those are. So I located the snare hardware first and then laid out the rest of the hardware from there. It's very important to me not to mess up the location of the snares. I actually did that on one of the Project 303 drums, and it will continue to haunt me for the rest of my days. Not really. So I went with 4.5 inch tube lugs because I couldn't find a 4-inch variation. I would have preferred 4 inches, but this was the best we could do. But I wanted something a little longer, and to me just seems to look a little bit more elegant. So that seems to have worked out pretty well. During the assembly phase, I ordered my hardware with all of the parts that I would need to accommodate mounting on a metal shell. So I ordered my lug screws with cupped washers already equipped, and the snare strainer hardware was nothing special. It's pretty straightforward. You don't need any special hardware to mount those. I used brass tension rods with black nylon washers under them, so there's a little less resistance to tuning. And because tube lugs don't come with a swivel nut, in order to keep the tension rod from binding up in the lug, I used a little bit of white lithium grease on each tension rod when I installed the heads. And speaking of the heads, they have Remo Ambassador coated on top and the Remo Ambassador snare side head on them. The snare wires themselves, buzzing away as they are 13-inch pure sound wires. And because the shell is this nice black finish, I just use the standard black snare tape that comes with instead of my usual grosgrain ribbon. Overall, it came out looking very nice. In fact, I really shouldn't be handling it with my bare hands. I should wear gloves because this thing is a fingerprint magnet. But it also sounds really good, and isn't that the point of a snare drum? So let's test drive this thing and see how it sounds at a few different tuning ranges. So anyway, that's the snare drum build. It's a fairly simple creature to build. Anybody who wants to buy the parts off of Drum Factory Direct can do it. And the main challenge really was, can I do this without making any mistakes on it? If you ruin a $200 shell, that's a pretty costly mistake. But fortunately, everything went well, and now I have a really nice, awesome snare drum to add to my collection. So anyway, that's the drum. I'm Mike Lindsay. Thanks for coming out.